Today is April 23rd, 2018, and my lesson today in the New Testament is Fake series is titled Mystery of the Atonement. We've always heard of the atonement being the only way to get close to God once again. And the Israelites had to make sacrifices every year, like they did them at different times of the year, but they got this special day of atonement once per year when all their sins were either forgiven, as some say, or rolled back, as others say, waiting for Calvary, which doesn't make any sense to me. Basically, they were still dying in sin. So where was the power of atonement? How can you be in sin and be at one with God? If your sin is only being covered, waiting for some supposed Messiah, then you're covering up the stuff that is there. So the sin that separated you from Him is still present. So how is it that when you cover up that which is present that separates you from your God, do you become at one with Him, even though the stuff is still there? It's under the blanket. You haven't removed it from the room, you haven't taken it out of the house, it's still there. But you are one with Him. So all one needs is just a blanket to cover up stuff. And the presence of sin that is covered will make one at one with God. Doesn't make any sense. But this is the kind of thinking that Calvary is built upon. As far as I can tell, and I'll be strong and bold with this, the Torah was rigged in order to produce Calvary. I didn't see this at first when I started my first lesson in the New Testament is Fake series. But you have to understand that everybody who's telling you the same thing in the same kind of way for 10, 15, 20, 25 years, and then other people pick it up later and carry it on, and 500 years later they're still telling you the same thing in the same kind of way. When Isaiah says, in the end, we're going to hear things we've never heard before. We're going to see things that have never been seen before. So if people are telling you the same thing from the day when they started to teach the scriptures, and it's still the same way, in this all of its core kind of concepts, you've got to question that. That doesn't mean everything people teach is wrong. I'm just saying you got to wonder. At least I find that as I learn, as I grow, as I study more, as I think the whole thing through some more, I can see some changes happening, and I can find them in the scriptures. Now, you might say certain things are wrong that I'm saying. That's fine with you, if you think that. I can't make you think things you don't want to think. But at least you must look at it if you are truly seeking for what you believe is scriptural truth. You must grow, you must change. I did that lesson so long ago. You must, or there is no growth. Understand that even the Torah shows that the people who were going to be known as the Most High changed as they grew. Some of the things that the patriarchs did, the children of Israel, when they became the nation, and the prophets that came up later and so on, built upon it and grew. So that if a patriarch would get up and let's say if Enoch were to come and see certain things being done by the nation of Israel, they would have to understand that this is different from what happened in my day. Some of these teachings are different. Because every time you get some new revelation or some new action from the Most High, some new deliverance, some change will happen from time to time. A prophet comes on and he learns from and builds upon his teacher, but then he begins to address the problems in the nation in a slightly improved kind of way, or it takes a little slant to it, such that even the teaching of the Messiah, and some of them say you can really find that heavily in like Daniel and Zechariah, are concepts that were built upon or improved, might I say, as Israel suffered more and more in captivities. That means that whoever first supposedly talked about a Messiah figure earlier in the Torah, and some say this would have been in the Garden of Eden when the Most High was killing some supposed animal as a sacrifice, then for a Messiah that would later come. Then we would then see that other people after Moses, if that were correct with the sacrifice in the garden, which is not, I've told you that before many times, but if that were true, you just have to imagine for a moment, then the people who built upon, like Zechariah and Daniel and supposedly Isaiah, with the misunderstandings of Isaiah, you would have to understand that those prophets then presented the message in a way that ballooned the topic of the Messiah in such a way that people who lived back in the time of the Garden of Eden, or in Enoch's time, or in Noah's time, and so on, would have to be looking at it, scratching their head, trying to learn some more from these later Torah writers of the nation of Israel, these later Torah prophets, because they spoke of a Messiah in a way that, according to the information that we have in the Torah and in extra biblical books, generally speaking, they didn't have those ideas or those teachings so far back. Those developed teachings came with the later prophets and teachers and scribes in later years of the Torah and of the life of the children of Israel. That means that people were in the Torah, they were building up on expounding, extrapolating, and fluffing up and just magnifying a teaching and putting concepts and ideas to it that would make it be more pronounced and more impressive and more, what's the word I'm looking for, more complicated than the first person who mentioned any Messiah concept in the Torah. So you cannot say that simply because I'm saying something here that is different from what you started teaching 25 years ago when you started, that I'm necessarily wrong just because I'm different. You got to take a look at it and think things through. Now, Leviticus chapter 1 and verse 4. And he shall put his hand upon the head of the burnt offering, and it shall be accepted, and it shall be accepted for him to make atonement for him. That's dealing with the performing of the sacrifices. They're making atonement, right, to bring people closer to the Creator, later known as the God of Israel. And this lesson is titled Mystery of the Atonement. Now I want to read here and talk about this a little bit more from this dictionary of the Bible, edited by James Hastings, Doctor of Divinity. And look at what he's saying here for atonement. The word atonement in English denotes the making to be at one, or reconciling, of persons who have been at variance. Right? You get that? That means something has gone wrong. They've been cut off. There's a disconnection there between them and the Most High. In Old Testament usage, it signifies that by which sin is covered. And they're talking about the Levitical sacrifices, like I just read in Leviticus chapter 1, verse 4 that I just read. They give other verses there. I don't want to get into them right now. So they're saying, thus in the Levitical sacrifices, it's talking about the half shekel of ransom money. I'm going to talk about that in another lesson. But basically, it's talking about covering the sin or bringing someone back, someone who has fallen out of good standing with the Creator and has been cut off. They are no longer at one with the Creator, but atonement, or like they say sometimes, at-one-ment, will make them at one again with the Most High. Think this through carefully, people. If the sacrifice was being done to make them at one, and it was going to avert a judgment, which, avert the wrath, which he actually said, I didn't read that part, let me look for it here. Yeah, okay, well, he's basically saying, a part of the meaning of the atonement is to cover up or to, kind of put off the sin, to avert the wrath of God. That shows me there a loophole with the atonement Levitical sacrifices, which Calvary is based on in the New Testament. Because if the sacrifices, when done just the way the Torah supposedly says that God wanted you to do it, this sacrifice of atonement, this procedure of atonement, was supposed to bring back people to be at one with the Creator / God of Israel and avert his wrath. But we know that in between the yearly atonement sacrifices and high holy day atonement, that they were still sometimes under the wrath of the God of Israel. Now, the simple-minded teacher who will try to teach you something else according to the evil part of the knowledge of good and evil tree, to tell you, well, they got that wrath like captivity and so on because they sinned in the middle. But think for yourself, people. Because the purpose of the atonement was to bring back one at one-ment with God in right standing. So you got one atonement high holy day sacrifice going on here last year and one this year. In between that, they are covered. They are covered. The Most High knows they just did one and he knows they're going to do one. You're telling me that in between the atonement, the Day of Atonement sacrifices, this sacrifice is not strong enough to last them the whole year, throughout the year, to cover them? It was that weak? So he's selling them short all the time? Why didn't he tell them to do this thing, this special Day of Atonement, every day or every week? This special high holy day atonement. Because he's giving them something that is short. Because if it only lasts 2 weeks, because they're going to sin again in 2 weeks, then after 2 weeks of doing the Day of Atonement sacrifice, after that 2-week period, they sinned, that Day of Atonement is not good enough anymore to carry them through. And you notice as well that when you say to me it was for the sins of the past year, that it wasn't strong enough to cover up what was done before in the past year or years. Because the Most High himself said many times, since the day you came out of Egypt, 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 you sinned against me. He keeps reminding them of all the stuff that they did. All along. If they offered a Day of Atonement sacrifice every year for what they did in that year, then it's done. It's gone away. But he keeps reminding them as if they are operating on the same guilt of what they did from they came out of Egypt? Why? Because he never forgave them because they never stopped sinning. That means atonement doesn't have any value in the life of someone who never stopped sinning. Their sin was a pre-Calvary sacrificial system. The Torah was rigged in order to produce a New Testament Calvary sacrifice. If I sinned coming out of Egypt and then I offer a Day of Atonement sacrifice, and you are my God and you're going to keep telling me, badgering me over the head that I sinned when I came out of Egypt, I sinned when I came out of Egypt, I sinned when I came out of Egypt, thus making me still psychologically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, physically guilty for something I did before I offered the Day of Atonement sacrifice. I'm still guilty no matter what, because you keep bringing it up. Why? Because the Most High knows in the Torah he never forgave them of anything. That's why he kept bringing it up. Because the sacrifices they were offering were never able to forgive anything, because it was a heathen sacrificial system. That's why he kept bringing it up. You know, if you're with a woman and she keeps bringing up your stuff for 5 years, you're like, man, didn't we deal with that already? Pardon me, sisters, but you understand where I'm coming from, right? Because you figure if you've worked through stuff and forgiveness has been reached and changes have happened, it shouldn't be coming up with this thing of it like you did that stuff to me again. I'm dangling it over your head like you're guilty right now. But the Most High keeps saying, since the day you came out, why? Because they never changed in their heart. They were looking at changes coming out of a sacrificial system that they learned from the heathen. Till the Most High just eventually called them heathen themselves. They were the goyim. Why? Because you can't separate them from the goyim, because they got goyim practices which stemmed from goyim learning, which stemmed from goyim lifestyle. Now look here at Genesis chapter 4 verse 26. And to Seth, to him also there was born a son, and he called his name Enos. Then began men to call upon the name of the Lord. That exposes the Torah right there with the sacrifices that were used to furnish Calvary with the wood to put up the so-called Son of God on a cross on. Men began to call upon the name of the Lord. So who were Cain and Abel sacrificing to? The precepts all throughout the Torah show me that sacrifices were being done by people who knew the Lord, who knew how to call upon the name of the Lord. Some of you call him Yahweh. How can you offer sacrifices? That reminds me of the whole thing in the New Testament with, I think it's Mars Hill or something like that, with Paul talking about, man, who you guys worshiping? We don't know. They don't even know his name, but they're just worshiping him. They're just worshiping him. They don't know who he is. They don't know. Can you imagine Cain and Abel? Imagine that they don't know the name of the Lord, but they're just sacrificing. Somebody come up and ask them probably, hey, who are you sacrificing to? We don't know. We're just sacrificing. You have no idea who you're sacrificing to. These people just come up here in Genesis 4 verse 26 and says, then began men to call upon the name of the Lord. Who were these men? Calling upon the name of the Lord? You see, the problem with that is that men are calling upon the name of the Lord, which shows that there is an abundance of good relations with the Creator. They're calling upon the name of the Lord just so suddenly. Nothing seems to have happened to develop that to tell you how men began to call upon the name of the Lord. They tell us Moses got the name, but where did these men just get the name from to call upon the name of the Lord? And they're telling you that this Lord is Jehovah or Yahweh, the famous tetragrammaton, which is at the border of deception. Because once you cross over the line to accepting this name of the tetragrammaton or Yahweh or Jehovah, you're just playing into deception once you cross over that line to accept that name. But anyway, they began to call upon the name of the Lord. What happened to make people begin to call upon this name? These two people, Cain and Abel, are sacrificing, and they have no clue, like the people at Mars Hill in the New Testament. They have no clue who they're sacrificing to because they don't have no name yet, because men began to call upon the name of the Lord. So they're calling upon the name of the Lord like that. They began to call upon the name of the Lord. If Eden was the fall, and Cain fell deeper, and Abel, he just fell out of the picture, and none of them had the name of the Lord, but they were sacrificing unto some unknown Lord. How is it that in this scripture, after all that has happened, men just began to call upon the name of the Lord when everything before that was showing that men could not or did not have connection with the Lord because they were not at one with the Lord, which means they need at one meant or atonement to bring them back in good standing with the Lord. So men are cut off through Cain, and they are cut off from the Garden of Eden. But they find at one meant to be able to get a revelation of his name that supposedly was not revealed until Moses came. The mystery of atonement is showing me that the atonement business in the scriptures here is a trick. Because you cannot begin to call upon the name of the Lord without the sacrifices. And you cannot have the sacrifices if you don't have the name to sacrifice to. Because in ancient times you can't access this God without his name. It's too soon. It's too soon. But I'm going to show you why in the name series it is impossible for them to not have had the name invoked from the very start of Adam before even Cain and Abel were born and were sacrificing. Yet it tells you here that men began to call. That means if they began to call, that means atonement or at-one-ment happened for them to get that closeness, that restoration back, to begin to call upon the name of the Lord. Because to call upon the name of the Lord, to begin to do it, signifies in Scripture that there is a oneness with the God of Israel again, or a oneness or a coming together, a reunion with him. To be able to call upon the name of the Lord as a nation or as earth. And men began to call, putting it to you in a way that shows you that like the world, the earth just began to call upon, or at least a good enough number of them for it to say, and men began. Showing you that this was something very significant. This was at the height of revelation, big stuff that's going on earth, and men began to call. Where did they get this at-one-ment from? How did they accomplish this atonement? To be able to get such closeness from the Creator to call upon his name, which was not yet revealed, so they say. And they got to this point to call upon the name of the Lord with no atonement sacrifice. How do you get this atonement? How? So that all men everywhere, in general, it's speaking generally. So maybe every single person was not, but possibly so. We don't know. But whether it's every single person or just a lot of them, enough to make it sound like everybody, like sometimes you say everybody in the room voted for it when there might have been 3 people who didn't vote. But most of the people, you just say everybody wanted it, pretty much, So it says, and men began. So it sounds like everybody in that general sense began. That means that everybody began to have a union with the Creator. What brought this union without atonement sacrifice? You're telling me all men were just able to find union with the Creator without a Levitical sacrifice? So that Genesis 4:26 says they just began to call based on this union, basically is what it means. All men found their way back to the Creator without the sacrifice that Calvary is built on. All men found their way to atonement or atonement without ever having performed a sacrifice. Because the first sacrifice that man did ended in disaster because Cain slew his brother Abel, showing you that the precept is telling you that the starting point of sacrifice is death, not just, come on. Can you understand that the initial sacrifice by man, not talking about the fake so-called sacrifice the Creator did in Genesis, in the garden, as they're saying, I dealt with that already, but Cain and Abel, they're doing sacrifice. And it results in somebody's death. Does that bring union with God at one moment? And then you say, well, he killed him because his sacrifice wasn't accepted. Right. So there is right there now, a right and a wrong way. But it doesn't take away that sacrifice doesn't give you anything. Like Calvary doesn't give you anything, it's showing you that Calvary being the last sacrifice in the Bible, in general speaking, the Bible, we know it's New Testament. But the first sacrifice by man would have been with Cain and Abel. And it's showing you that just like the last sacrifice at Calvary, the first sacrifice didn't do anybody any good. In fact, it brought death of the man whose sacrifice was received. So the one sacrifice who was not received, he got judgment, showing you that sacrifice don't bring benefit to him. And the one whose sacrifice was supposedly received, Abel, it brought him death, showing you it didn't bring benefit to him either. The sacrifice of the righteous Abel did not do him any good. It didn't do no good for him. It brought his death. Because when sacrifices of the heathen are brought into the scriptures, people are going to die in a relationship with the Creator. But of course, the one who slew Abel is still going to get some extra judgment. But so you see what I'm saying now? Men began to call upon the name of the Lord because they were starting up their own religion, which had a sacrificial system in it that gave them the name of their Lord, which is not even Yahweh or Yah. So the whole thing here is cooked in a pot that shows that the food is burning really bad. You're offering sacrifice at Calvary, don't bring your sin because of all the lessons I've done so far that shows that Calvary was a serious problem, can't bring salvation to anybody. And they're going to build third temple and sacrifice again. For what reason? If Jesus was the first lamb from creation slain before the foundation, and he is the final sacrifice again, how come there's going to be another sacrifice when Israel is back in a third temple? Like, how can there be another sacrifice? That just don't make any sense, because sacrifices are a trick, a big trick in the Torah. To close it out here with the mystery of atonement coming from sacrifices. You offering a sacrifice to your God, let's say your God is called Yahweh, Somebody over there in the next town, they're offering a sacrifice to their god. Their El is called socks and shoes. Over to the right in the next country, the next people, they're offering a sacrifice to their heathen god. Their god is called iron pipe. You're worshiping Yahweh. And if you're like Abel and Cain, apparently you don't know his name. So it's like, in their case, their God doesn't even have a name. But men who were farther removed from the Creator than they, Cain and Abel, were, managed to have the name. And they were closer, as their parents were actually in the garden. And they don't get no name. But people, when the earth became more corrupt, just began in Genesis 4:26 to call upon the name of the Lord. And the people who were closer to the Garden of Eden didn't have no such name. So the worse the world gets, the more clearer the revelation gets. So that people have more union with God and even knowing his personal name. And you tell me something isn't wrong with this? So you're worshiping Yahweh. Cain and Abel, they're worshiping some God that they don't even know, like some Mars Hill kind of stuff happening in New Testament with Paul. The people over onto your left in their country, they're offering up to their El, who is socks and shoes. And over to your right, the other heathen people, they're offering up to iron pipe, their El. Can't you see what's going on here? That if sacrifices began with Cain and Abel, in a time when earth fell, as usually we're told it is the quote-unquote fall, then in the time of the fall, especially when the fall was fresh, people started offering sacrifices. And then you find every Tom, Dick, and Harry doing similar sacrifices with the same kind of animals, and sometimes offering people and children. Even the nation of Israel did that as well. And they're offering up over here, you offering it to Yahweh right here, them offering it to whoever the world they're offering it to, them over there offering to socks and shoes, them over there offering to iron pipe. Everybody's doing the same thing. Now, the final question is to ask you this. If everybody is offering a sacrifice of animals, and they're slaughtering the animals carefully, and it gives atonement or atonement to Israel, why don't give atonement to the people that's doing it in the next country? You kill a lamb, they kill a lamb. You kill a bull, they kill a bull. You kill a ox, they kill a ox. You kill a steer, they kill a steer. You kill a turtle dove, they kill a turtle dove. You kill your child, they kill their child. And it gives you, Israel, atonement with the Creator. But it don't give them anything. The blood run out just like it run out of yours. But you're Israel, so it benefits you, but it don't benefit them. Yet still, before there was an Israel, men began to call upon the name of the Lord. So before there was an Israel, men found a way to have atonement with the Creator, or have a union with the Creator. And when we look at what men have been doing all along, offering sacrifices, that means in some kind of way, they found a way to reach atonement. And Israel is found doing the same atonement procedure, which is the same kind of animal sacrificing that Calvary is built on, as there was a lamb at Calvary. So Israel begins to do the same kind of animal sacrifice as the nations of the world that do not know the Lord are doing. And the same procedure, the same sacrifice, when everybody is looking for God. I just read that in Isaiah today. Don't give me no rubbish on that. But that's another lesson, so I won't bother get into it here. Everybody's looking for the Most High. I don't care how evil you want to say people are. Everybody, if you say people have got some, what they call it, the DMT or whatever they call it, the spirit molecule or whatever they call it, everybody has this God particle stuff in them or whatever. Everybody's looking for. That's why the Creator has it put there in the scriptures, saying the heavens declare the glory of God, and firmament showing his handiwork. Why is he showing it? Why? Because people are looking for him. Not just Israel. People are looking. So these people began to call upon the name of the Lord. These people are offering sacrifices. These people are doing it today. And certainly in biblical times they were doing these sacrifices. And everybody looking for God. And you tell me my lesson is too messy, it's too jumbled up. Now, your Torah ideas are jumbled up because you've got a sacrificial system that is impossible to deny. Thousands of books have been written on this. Millions of teachings have gone on in the earth over this. You've got a Torah sacrificial system of slaughtering animals that heathen nations have done all along. And for doing the same thing, they get nothing, but Israel becomes righteous through it. So it is a righteous act. But when people in other nations who are heathen try to find righteousness and atonement and do a righteous act or an atonement act, they can't get it because somehow God don't give a damn about them, but he made all the peoples of the earth. And the spirit of man is the candle of the Lord, but he don't want to see them, he only wants to see Israel. People are trying to find light because the spirit of man is a candle of the, and they're trying to find light through the atonement sacrifices. They're trying to find light so the Most High can see something in them. They're searched, they're crying out for him, they're going after him. And they offer the same bull that you offered up or the same lamb. And it don't do them anything. This seems like a very partial sacrificial system. I go to church, you go to church, I get saved, you don't get saved. I climb the mountain to find God, I don't get to find him, but because you're Israel, when you climb it, you find him. But then you tell me later in the book of Isaiah and Malachi that when they climb it in the end and go up to Jerusalem, the Lord will go out, they're going to say, let us go to the God of Jacob. When they climb the mountain, then they find it. Showing you that it's possible for people who are not Israelites to climb the mountain and go and find God. But when they climb it in the scriptures with the same sacrifices, you call them heathen, but you call yourself righteous for the same sacrifices that you offered upon the mountaintops and the hills and the groves. You are heathen and you don't even know it. And your Calvary was built upon that sacrificial system. The Torah was rigged long time ago to produce Calvary.